we have our first presentation. And for that presentation, I would like to invite Ms. Victoria Soporta, our Executive Committee Chair, and Mr. Jonathan Dixon, our Secretary General, who will provide a walkthrough of our major milestone achievements in 2019 and discuss our outlook for 2020. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, excellent. I feel like I'm in a cockpit here, but very good. So thank you, everyone, and thank you on my behalf as well to Vice Chairman Qualls for those excellent remarks about the important connections between the work of the IAIS and the FSB. Talking of which, we now come to the point in which we get to share a bit more detail about what we have been working on, as Vicky said, tirelessly, although I'm not sure we didn't get a bit tired at times, and very intensively, particularly over the last few days. I do want to apologize up front that this may be a somewhat content-intensive presentation, but I do realize that there is a fair bit of interest in where we have got to on these major projects over the last few days. So if you'll bear with me, the plan is I will take you through the presentation, giving some details on what we have agreed, if my voice lasts, and Vicky is here to add some context and some remarks as well. So I will take us on a brief journey through our major milestones in this past year, and also give a quick glimpse into our plans for the year ahead. So 2019 was an important year for the IAIS. Some would even say a very important year for the IAIS. Not only because we reached 25 years as the global standard setter for the insurance sector, but more importantly because this year saw us take major steps forward under a number of significant post-crisis reforms. These achievements represent the culmination of many years of hard work and dedicated collaboration among supervisors aimed at furthering our shared commitment to promote a safe, stable, and fair insurance sector for the protection of policyholders globally. This was also the year during which we laid the foundation of our vision for the next 5 years with the approval of our 2020 to 2024 strategic plan, which we approved in June. So with the above in mind, I'll spend some time this afternoon updating you on the following key highlights for 2019. Firstly, finalization of a comprehensive review and update of our insurance core principles, the ICPs. Adoption of a common framework for the supervision of internationally active insurance groups, or ComFrame for short. Adoption of a holistic framework for the assessment and mitigation of systemic risk. And lastly, agreement on the Insurance Capital Standard ICS version 2.0 for the monitoring period, plus an approach to operationalization of the monitoring period and an approach to our comparability assessment between the aggregation method and the ICS. I'll also end with a brief outlook of some of our planned activities for 2020 focused on supporting our membership to respond proactively to a range of emerged, and accelerating trends set to transform the insurance landscape over the coming years. So let me begin by sharing that we have, let me take it back here. Let me begin with the first of these reforms, adopted earlier today, which is a substantially revised set of ICPs that apply to all insurers, which brings together and brings to fruition a multi-year, broad-ranging review of our supervisory material. The review process commenced in 2015 and was aimed at addressing issues and challenges identified during our self-assessment and peer review processes, as well as FSAPs by the IMF and World Bank, addressing issues applicable to all insurers that were identified during the development of ComFrame, incorporating recommendations, standards and guidance from other relevant standard-setting bodies, including, amongst others, the FSB, who we've just heard from, and the G20, and lastly, responding to key market trends and developments. If you're interested in more details and background around this review, there is a public consultation on the revised ICPs that you can join with the public discussion session scheduled for 26 November by teleconference. What we now have achieved is a comprehensive and stable and coherent set of supervisory material, which, together with ComFrame and the holistic framework, reflects all major key standard setting and market developments influencing the insurance sector. We now have a brand new, shiny set of standards. Now the challenge is to implement them, and the IAIS will pivot to an enhanced focus on implementation, assessment and capacity building activities as set out in the strategic plan. The next significant accomplishment is ComFrame. And I say significant because for the first time, we now have a global framework for the effective and globally consistent supervision of internationally active insurance groups. It took time, but this is a milestone to consider. This is the first time we have a global framework for supervision of what are global groups, a global response to this global challenge. This is a crucial element of our post-crisis reform agenda. It builds upon this new set of ICPs that we have. ComFrame's a comprehensive and outcomes-focused framework aimed at facilitating effective group-wide supervision of internationally active insurance groups, by providing qualitative and, in a future phase, quantitative supervisory minimum requirements tailored to the activity and size of internationally active insurance groups. This should help supervisors to address group-wide risks and avoid supervisory gaps. One of the main objectives of ComFrame is to support coordination of supervisory activities between group-wide supervisors and other involved supervisors, thereby providing supervisors with a common language for the supervision of IAIGs. This will benefit not only supervisors, but also IAIGs, ultimately resulting in enhanced policyholder protection. While the adoption of ComFrame signifies a seminal breakthrough for the IAIS, we must now immediately turn our attention to its effective implementation. We recognize that many jurisdictions will need time to appropriately change their legislation or to adjust supervisory practices to facilitate effective implementation. To this end, we, as the IAIS, will have an initial focus from next year on supporting members' efforts to implement ComFrame before moving on to assessing the implementation of ComFrame from 2021. I also want to point out that we have an agreement around the identification of IIGs. Group-wide supervisors will be responsible for the identification of IIGs in cooperation with other involved supervisors in supervisory colleges after considering whether a group meets specific criteria which are very transparently provided in ComFrame itself. Group-wide supervisors commit to disclose publicly the identification of IIGs at the earliest possible opportunity, noting that in some cases this disclosure may require legislative changes or regulatory action. From early 2020, we as the IAIS will compile a public register of those IAIGs that have been publicly disclosed by group-wide supervisors. The register will be accompanied by information on its completeness, including a comparison of the number of publicly disclosed IAGs with the total number of IAGs that have been identified by group-wide supervisors based on meeting the IAG criteria or on the exercise of supervisory discretion. Moving on now to the holistic framework. So in addition to the revised ICPs and ComFrame, and to further contribute to financial stability, IAIS members today also adopted the holistic framework for systemic risk for implementation from January 2020 onwards. The IAIS's approach to the assessment and mitigation of systemic risk has seen a significant evolution since 2013, which was when the assessment methodology for global systemically important insurers, or GSIs, was first developed, and GSI policy measures were initially adopted. This evolution recognizes that systemic risk in the insurance sector may arise not only from the distress or disorderly failure of individual insurers, but also from the collective exposures of insurers at a sector-wide level. We have followed extensive consultation on the development of this framework, and we're very appreciative of all the stakeholder engagement that we've had along the way. In November 2018, we issued a draft holistic framework for consultation, and in June this year, we released a further consultation proposing specific revisions to ICPs and ComFrame material specifically designed to help assess and mitigate potential systemic risk building up in the insurance sector. Throughout the process, we've obtained many valuable and constructive inputs, as I say, not only from our members and stakeholders, not only from our members, but also the broader stakeholders, which resulted in the final holistic framework that was adopted today. I think this was really a demonstration of the power of that effective collaboration and cooperation and consultation. So thank you very much. A little bit more detail on the holistic framework. So the documents adopted today contain three key elements of the holistic framework, namely, firstly, an enhanced set of supervisory policy measures and powers of intervention. Secondly, a global monitoring exercise and thirdly, implementation assessment. So the first element is the enhanced set of supervisory policy measures, and these are designed to increase the overall resilience of the insurance sector and help prevent insurance sector vulnerabilities and exposures from developing into systemic risk in the first place. But should there be a potential systemic risk that is detected, then we need supervisory powers of intervention that enable a prompt and appropriate response. The holistic framework moves away from the previous binary approach in which a set of predetermined policy measures applied only to a small set of identified GSIs, to one which promotes a proportionate application of an enhanced set of supervisory policy measures and powers of intervention for macroprudential purposes to a broader portion of the insurance sector through the ICPs and ComFrame. The second element is the global monitoring exercise. A global monitoring exercise by the IAIS, which is designed to assess global insurance market trends and developments and detect the possible build-up of systemic risk in the global insurance sector. This includes, at an individual insurer and sector-wide level, a collective discussion at the IAIS on the assessment of potential systemic risks and appropriate supervisory responses, and the reporting of both of these outcomes and the responses to the FSB. The IAIS this week also approved a more detailed document setting out the objectives and process of the global monitoring exercise, which will also be published. Lastly, the final element of the holistic framework is the IAIS's assessment of the consistent implementation of the holistic framework supervisory material. It's aimed at promoting globally consistent and effective implementation of the relevant supervisory material amongst its members, recognizing that this framework is only as effective only effective to the extent that it is robustly and consistently implemented. To support implementation of the supervisory material, the IAIS this week also approved, for public consultation, an application paper on liquidity risk management for comment, being a key aspect of this new holistic framework. It sets out good supervisory practices in this space. And next year, we will develop a paper to support the implementation of the revised ICP 24 on macroprudential supervision. As I said, following adoption this morning, all documents related to the holistic framework will be available on the IAIS website from this afternoon, and a public discussion and background session will be held via teleconference on the 10th of December. The implementation of the holistic framework will commence from January 2020. If appropriately implemented, the framework is expected to provide an enhanced basis for assessing and mitigating systemic risk in the insurance sector. And in light of this finalized framework, happy to share that the FSB has decided not to engage in an identification of global systemically important insurers in 2019 and to suspend GSI identification from 2020, subject to a final review in November 2022, when the FSB will review whether to discontinue or to re-establish an annual identification of GSIs based on the initial years of Last but not least, the Insurance Capital Standard, or ICS. ICS is an important component of ComFrame with the purpose of creating a common language for supervisory discussion of group solvency of IAIGs to enhance global convergence among group capital standards. The ultimate goal is a single ICS that includes a common methodology by which one ICS achieves comparable, i.e. substantially the same, outcomes across jurisdictions. We reached a significant milestone in the journey to this ultimate goal today. Our executive committee has agreed on an ICS version 2.0 for the monitoring period. From January 2020, this ICS version 2.0 enters a 5-year monitoring period, during which it will be used for confidential reporting to group-wide supervisors, discussion in supervisory colleges, and further analysis by the IAIS. The purpose of the monitoring period is to monitor the performance of the ICS over a period of time and not the capital adequacy of IAIGs. It will not be used as a prescribed capital requirement. The ICS results will not be used as a basis to trigger supervisory action, and IAIGs are not expected to manage their business to the ICS. And it is also not for use by third parties. In progressing the work on the ICS, I'm pleased to confirm that the IAIS ExCo this week reached agreement on 3 key legs of an ICS package. First of all, agreement on the design of the reference ICS version 2.0 for the monitoring period. Secondly, agreement on the operationalization aspects of the monitoring period, including the collective effort of supervisors to make participation in the monitoring period as large as possible across different jurisdictions and different business models, in order to ensure that the ICS captures risk appropriately. And lastly, agreement on a high-level definition of comparable outcomes and an overarching approach to guide the development of principles and criteria for the assessment of whether the aggregation method being developed by the US and other interested jurisdictions provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. I want to stress that the IAIS values the ongoing input and feedback of stakeholders on these important sector-wide reforms. The feedback received during the monitoring period will be used to further improve the ICS. In addition to this feedback from stakeholders, the feedback from supervisors, the feedback from public consultation, there will also be feedback from the results of an economic impact assessment to be carried out before the end of the monitoring period, all of which may result in changes to ICS version 2.0. During the monitoring period, the IAIS intends to maintain at least the same level of engagement with stakeholders as it had during the field testing period. So that was 2019. It was pretty action-packed. But one last slide to share with you, which is a glimpse into the period ahead as we move into our next 5-year strategic cycle, in which implementation and assessment of these significant reforms will be a critical priority, but a period in which our focus will also turn to the next horizon. We've identified important trends and developments listed there: fintech, cyber, climate risk, conduct and culture, sustainable development, that have the potential to reshape the insurance sector in the coming years. As the global community of insurance supervisors, IAIS members need to remain keenly aware of and respond with agility and insight to these trends and developments. In 2020, therefore, the IAIS will heighten our efforts to be forward-looking and collaborative in supporting our members to devise effective supervisory responses to these various developments. Let me maybe share a few snapshots of the exciting future-focused work that we've planned for the year ahead. On fintech, as you know, we have a fintech forum for supervisors to exchange information and perspectives and to feed into the development of supervisory guidance. Several key insights have already emerged from discussions, such as the use of SupTech. Expanding our engagement, we have met with leading figures in technology on topical issues such as big data and artificial intelligence. In 2020, we will continue to monitor these trends and provide our members with a platform for sharing experiences and short topical papers outlining these issues and providing supervisory guidance on things like big tech and SupTech. On cyber, last year we published our application paper to enhance supervisory practices for managing cyber resilience. Our attention has now shifted to the other side of the coin, where insurers are actively taking on cyber risk through their underwriting activities. And we have formed a small group of members to look into how this cyber underwriting can be done in a sustainable way, and to explore the role of insurance supervisors in this regard. That work is underway, and we expect to receive a report on the exploratory work of that group in February, which will guide our thinking on future focus areas. On climate, last year we teamed up with the Sustainable Insurance Forum to publish a groundbreaking paper on climate change risks to the insurance sector and the role of supervisors in that topic. Building on that, our attention is shifting to implementation actions, with disclosure being a core focus, utilizing the FSB's TCFD recommendations. The IAIS and SIF are working on an issues paper to raise awareness on climate-related disclosures, use of scenarios and metrics, and supporting the development of best practices for insurer financial disclosures on climate risk. In 2020, we will also work on an application paper which will provide guidance to supervisors on how to address challenges and opportunities arising from climate risk within the framework provided by the ICPs and ComFrame. On conduct and culture, we have identified these two issues of conduct and culture as being a key focus area, particularly to highlight the importance of a more holistic or overarching approach to both prudential and conduct supervision, recognizing that conduct risk can have considerable financial and stability implications. As a first step to unpacking this theme, we plan to develop an issues paper that will identify specific drivers, culture drivers, and what that means for both prudential and conduct risk, and to help supervisors assess the overall culture of insurers with case studies and examples of how these drivers can potentially lead to negative outcomes for policyholders. And last but not least, on sustainable development, This remains a key topic for us, looking at the role of supervisors in responding to the protection gap. But some specific issues to pick up on is that we have already decided that we will have a particular specific project on whether the ICS should provide for a differential treatment for qualifying infrastructure investments. We'll also continue to drive our agenda on financial inclusion in support of our members who have a focus on market development. And we're excited to work closely with our implementation partner, the Access to Insurance Initiative, the A2II, on this important topic. As you can see, whilst we've reached some major milestones on our post-crisis reform agenda, it's been an extremely busy and fruitful period, but there is not much time to rest as we look ahead to implementation and a new and revitalized program for the next 5-year cycle. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Vicky.
Thank you, Jonathan, and for this overview of our achievements up to 2019, but also an overview of the work that still lies ahead of us. I mean, I think you have said it all. Perhaps I can just describe it a little bit in the way that I actually see it. Essentially, we had the crisis that hit us in 2008, 2009. I mean, sort of the insurance sector was not in the heart of it, despite the fact, of course, that one insurance company at the time, because mainly of its non-traditional activities, did fail spectacularly and was bailed out. It revealed lots of gaps, prudential gaps in our frameworks. So the journey we started at the IAIS from 2013 was in response or inspired by this crisis. We didn't start from nothing because we did have the insurance core principles. The insurance core principles apply at the legal entity level and are, of course, for every size of company, and they're supposed to be applying in a proportionate manner. So we had a building block. That building block had to be revised to taking on feedback. But we had nothing on groups, on internationally active groups, despite the fact that it had been shown at that time that they can contribute to financial instability under certain extreme conditions. Moreover, we had nothing as a standard setter at the time to guide the supervision at the group-wide level of active insurance groups. That was ComFrame, and that's what our general meeting adopted earlier today. It built on the bedrock of the revised ICPs, but it was specific to internationally active insurance groups. So now we've got that. So bedrock, first another floor above it, and then above that lies essentially what is the holistic framework to systemic risk. This is the IAIS designed insurance, designed by insurance supervisors, not designed by any other supervisor, approach to looking and trying to spot and mitigate potential risks to financial stability above that, which is the holistic framework. The holistic framework will has specific supervisory material aspects built in within ComFrame and the ICPs, but importantly, has essentially what we call the global monitoring exercise. It's a surveillance framework. For the first time from implementation next year, we will be able to have conversations when we talk about sector-wide about what are the exposures to our sectors to the low risk environment, to what extent, which is a data-driven as well as a supervisory driven conversation. You know, real rates, a lot of economists believe, have fallen. What does that mean for the life insurance sector? What does it mean for their incentives to risk up? What do we think, what do we see in the exposures to these macro developments that are happening on a sector-wide, activities-wide basis? It's just an example of this. And this will allow us, from an insurance supervisory perspective, to contribute to the cross-sectoral discussions of the FSB. We own that framework. That's a substantial achievement. And, of course, we might find occasionally, as it was in the case with that big firm so many years ago during the financial crisis, that certain type of activities that concentrate on one individual company, we will have the tools to be able, hopefully, to identify these risks ahead of time. It's a forward-looking approach. Now, of course, I've been a regulator for so long that I'm no longer the 25-year-old that I was when I joined my authority, and I know that the dream of spotting financial stability risks ahead of time is a very difficult dream to achieve in practice. Something will hit us that at some point that we have not observed. However, my 23 years of experience, 25 years of experience as a regulator have also told me that there are some risks that can be identified in advance, and if they're mitigated, we can save society a lot of cost. And this is the purpose of that layer above of the house that we have built. Now, all that is all good, but it's design, it's development. As all regulators who have had some experience know, policy and rules and legislation, regulatory rules, standards, etc., are worth nothing if they're not implemented in practice. And this is the stage that we need to move on next, and it's reflected in our strategic plan. Moreover, we also need to recognize that our supervisory community will need support in implementing some of these standards, and effectively, so we stand ready to support them. And finally, and this is reflected in our new strategic plan, we do not at this moment intend to be changing our standards very, very frequently, because effective implementation can only be achieved if the standards remain relatively stable. So, development, now implementation, support, supervisory guidance on this material. Now, turning to the ICS version 2.0, of course, this reflects a significant step into achieving our ultimate goal, and it delivers on the commitment and the agreement we had made back in Malaysia 2 years ago. We have entered the monitoring period. We have a new designed reference ICS for IAGs to report to supervisory colleges and to us. And we have also done a first step to deliver a path towards outcome equivalence for the aggregation method developed by the US and other interested jurisdictions by agreeing a definition on comparable outcomes between the ICS and the aggregation method. Now, this is an important development, an important delivery of what we had agreed 2 years ago, but we all recognize it's one step. ICS is the quantitative capital adequacy metric for ComFrame, is one step towards achieving the ultimate goal, and we have laid out in detail a plan of what we are going to be doing over the next 5 years to achieve the next step, which is ICS as a PCR, prescribed capital requirement as defined in our supervisory material, and a comparability assessment and outcome with the aggregation method. So that will require quite a bit of work and is, of course, again, a development in that particular aspect. We will still have to be doing some policy development, of course, as we lead towards the last stage. So that's the way I see it. Brick by brick, we've now built the supervisory material, the framework. We need to shift to implementing it and to help the community. And of course, we now, having done all of that, we are no longer in a crisis period. I sometimes think that the next crisis is going to hit us soon, but God forbid. We need to turn to our attention much more fully, although Jonathan has already explained that we have done so, despite the workload we had on the other elements, on the issues that were outlined in his last slide. And of course, today we're going to be talking about a big issue, which is the impact of technology for supervisors, which is a big focus of our agenda. So that's how I see it. So we have entered, after the end of today, the post-crisis era. But I'm weary each time I say post-crisis era. Something else might hit. I remember actually that the day Lehman Brothers failed, there was a conference in the institution where I work, the Bank of England, celebrating the past years of macroeconomic stability. So I hope this is not an omen. But we have certainly completed the work plan and the work program that we promised, and we've delivered. Now to the next stage. Thank you.